So I haven't done one of these types of videos in a while, and I thought it'd be fun to do one as a cozy intro to the end of the year's fall, winter, liminal vibes. I'm, of course, talking about the return of my spooky Sublevels series, the series where I talk about sublevels that I think are both cool and unsettling. However, I'm doing things a bit different this time. See, I usually pick a level with a bunch of really neat sublevels, but there aren't really many of those anymore. So I figured, why not just compile a few sublevels that have a similar vibe? And that's what this video is. Today, I'll be talking about 4 sublevels that have a liminal and uncanny dreamlike feel to them. Basically the thing that made the concept of the Backrooms go viral in the first place. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into our sublevels. Level 43.8, also known as the Untitled Aquascape, is classified as a Class 1 in the Threat Index and is safe, unstable, and has minimal occurrences of phenomena. This sublevel is an uncanny aquarium with a confusing and disorienting layout. If you've ever been to an aquarium and been in those rooms where you're in a tunnel looking at all the fish, then you have a pretty good idea of the vibe and look of this level. The majority of the sublevel is comprised of these tunnel-like aquarium hallways, but you can also find places like restaurants and smaller exhibits that detail the anomalous sea creatures found in this sublevel. To be honest, as I was reading through the Sublevel page and trying to imagine what kind of feelings a place like this could invoke, it reminded me of this aquarium my parents took me to when I was a kid. It's called Adventure Aquarium in Camden, New Jersey, and features a lot of these tunnel areas like the Sublevel page mentions. I even remember going through an exhibit and then suddenly being surprised that we were in like a food court looking area. If any of y'all have been there, tell me about it in the comments below. Anyway, the fish here in this sublevel aren't the typical fish you'd see in your standard everyday aquarium. They're described as varying in shape and size, color, and are essentially one of a kind in appearance. Though, like I mentioned earlier, the sublevel has little informational areas that are supposed to tell you about the fish that are here. The names of the creatures are pretty much incomprehensible, however, and they're even theorized to be written in a completely different language. I wonder if you'd be able to find Walter Whale and Peter Fish there. The sublevel page states that these anomalous looking fish only bear a slight resemblance to the ones found here in reality. Not that whales are fish, okay? They're mammals. There's also a bunch of aquatic flora, which, much like the fish, are completely exotic and unique looking. This sublevel is also described as having carpet sprawled across the floor, but unlike other levels and sublevels you'd find in the backrooms, this carpet is lacking any carpet fluid or generally any other form of uncleanliness. In fact, wanderers may note that the sublevel itself seems to be pristine and free of any kind of grime or dust. This is due to the Faceling cleanup crew that seems to work tirelessly in keeping everything nice and tidy. This includes vacuuming and presumably shampooing the carpets, wiping down the windows, and even cleaning the walls, which, as a parent, if I could have that cleanup crew help me keep up with housework, I'd be so happy. Oh my god. Several wanderers who have done extensive research into the sublevel mentioned that this faceling cleanup crew seems to be made up of around 4 or 5 facelings, and it's believed that their cleaning equipment can clean literally any type of dirt, dust, or general grime that may appear in the sublevel. This is supported by researching wanderers noting just how clean the sublevel is, as well as what's noted as the quote-unquote disappearance of many problems in the sublevel, which I'm not sure what that could mean, but if it doesn't mean one of the tunnel windows cracks open and floods the entire sublevel, then I'm sure it's all good. Speaking of the aquariums themselves, I mentioned that there's a bunch of unique and exotic looking fauna and flora species within these tanks, but an interesting thing that researchers have noted is that some of these fish seem to be evolutionarily similar to the fish you'd find here in reality. There's even a working theory that somehow a bunch of different ancient fish no-clipped into this sublevel and ended up thriving from there, which is really funny and unsettling to imagine a bunch of fish suddenly disappearing into the ocean floor. But there seems to be a thriving ecosystem within these tanks, as many of these creatures display their usual inclinations to hunt other species as a source of food. Not only that, but the flora has also evolved to a point where it bears low-hanging fruit, which the aquarium denizens also eat. These fruits then rely on their seeds being carried through the tank's filtration system to end up in other tanks and grow there. But they can also become great fertilizer for other plants if they can't be whisked away. Moving on to the informational areas, if a wanderer were to try and read any of the signs that detail the species found here, they'll note that not only are the names written in an incomprehensible language, but the information detailing these species is always said to be written in the wanderer's native language. So if your native language is like Spanish or something, it'll be written in that. The information detailing these creatures is also noted to be quote-unquote absurd, but research into these species have shown that what is written down about them is actually true. Can you imagine? Yeah, man, it says this whale-looking thing with a man's face is supposed to like make and sell meth. I don't know if I believe it. Oh no, wow, look at that. It's selling meth to that fish. Also, the picture that the author included here literally feels like it was taken in the aquarium I mentioned earlier, so that feels like a nice blast from the past. And as you can see in this picture, the informational sections are described to have various patterns made from cheap paint, which can be found on the walls. They're usually made up of the silhouettes of the various species found within the room and depicts them as if they were swimming. They induce a visual hallucination in the wanderer, leading them to believe that these shapes are in fact moving. However, this is one of the rarer sublevels where cameras are actually noted to work, so videos were taken of these patterns and it was confirmed that they were actually stationary. The last area type you can find while wandering through this aquatic paradise are the restaurants. These restaurants are usually empty, and while there aren't any employees or entities seen here, there is always food that will be served anonymously at the front of the counter. Counter in this case meaning a small ridge in the wall to the left side of the restaurant that generates food. But if I were you, I'd be super careful about eating anything that is served to you at this level. The quality of the food can vary, and if you're not careful, you could get served food that is basically the run of the pack and has a high chance of carrying diseases. If you're lucky enough to avoid the dubious looking slop, then you can expect to be served seafood with a side of french fries. As for seating, there are areas filled with perfectly clean chairs and tables ready for a wanderer to rest their feet and enjoy a hopefully good seafood meal. If a wanderer then finishes their food within 12 hours of the last regeneration, the counter will mysteriously replenish the food, seemingly teleporting these plates into the vacant positions. But like I mentioned earlier, you should be careful about the quality of the food, and if it starts to look more like a pile of slop than actual edible food, avoid it at all costs. This sublevel is inhabited by two groups. One is the Seaside Diner, and the other is a Meg Research Division, specifically Temporary Colony Tango. Seaside Diner is described as a small diner built by an unknown man in 2004, wherein he used scrap metal found within one of the level's many cafeterias. An interesting note is that the food generation phenomenon stopped after construction of Seaside Diner finished. This forced Seaside Diner to build an actual working kitchen, and various other renovations, where employees serve food for free and only stay afloat through the generous donations of others. The diner is also said to still be operating today. The Meg Research Division, however, is a temporary colony that was established to research the various anomalous species of flora and fauna found within level 43.8. The colony itself aims to dissolve in 2030, but they've already taken major strides in research, like discovering numerous traits and the anomalous fish that could possibly be transported into humans, something which isn't further described in the level page, but interesting to think about. As for entrances and exits, you can enter level 43.8 if you happen to come across and enter an inconsistent area of the water hallways found in level 43. This inconsistency has been described as various feelings, like there's something off in that area. It could be looping geometry, a fake feeling environment, or as if someone's watching you. Continuing to walk through these areas and push past that feeling will lead you to end up in level 43.8. To exit the sublevel, a wanderer can find and no-clip into a rare Waterworld sign to go back to level 43. These signs are noted to be deserted and rather out of the way, which can not only make finding them difficult, but anxiety-inducing, as these signs are the only way to leave this sublevel. I really enjoyed reading about the sublevel, mainly due to the nostalgic memories I have of going to the aquarium as a kid and being in awe of all the sea critters that swim by above and around me in those tunnel hallways. What did you guys think? Level 9.1, also known as Away from Home, is classified as Class Theta and is safe, stable, but contains mental hazards. This sublevel is described as a seemingly infinite sprawl of endless roads, neighborhoods, and residential buildings bathed in neon lights. It's always dusk here, adding more vibrance to the environment. The buildings that can be found in this sublevel don't just stop at houses. Wanderers can find apartments, hotels, inns, hostels, and even motels here. Though an interesting quality about these buildings is that they do not exceed 3 stories in height, nor do they look extravagant. They instead maintain the appearance and vibe of a suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of a city. If a wanderer were to get lucky enough to enter one of these houses, they'd find that everything seems normal, but further inspection reveals that these houses have an uncanny cleanliness and emptiness. There are no personal objects or photos, for instance. It truly feels like you stumbled upon a neighborhood that was built as like a model for what a housing company wants to build. The layouts of the houses can also vary, but they usually contain 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. However, the layout for the more urban buildings is trickier to predict since they vary from each other so much. Another interesting property about the sublevel is that it seems to be more resistant to external damage than your typical structures can handle before breaking apart. So the possibility of repurposing a building or area of this sublevel into something more habitable is possible, but since there's already an abundance of 2-bed, 2-bath houses that are 2 or 3 stories tall max, I feel like that's a pretty good enough house to just kind of live in. Especially when you consider that these places are all equipped with running water and electricity, even if the internet connection itself is kind of buns. However, there's also another reason why it's unlikely that this level would face significant repurposing and habitation, and it's due to something called the Wanderlust effect, which I'll describe here in a bit. Now, despite all of this, a wanderer would still have to find an open building that they can safely inhabit, as a significant portion of the buildings in this sublevel are permanently locked. Though, if a wanderer were to encounter an open building, they'll be lucky enough to find safe consumables that are able to be gathered. These include your standard almond water bottles, also things like chips can apparently be found here. These houses will also only generate consumables that are not harmful, so you don't have to worry about cashew water or liquid paint spawning here, for instance. These buildings also contain a fully functional kitchen with smaller appliances, as well as things like computers and TVs. Though, given the fact that there isn't really a way to get raw ingredients to actually cook stuff with, having the kitchen seems kind of silly. And given the spotty internet connection found in this sublevel, things like computers possibly wouldn't do you much good unless you had like MS Paint on there and could practice your drawing or something. Further exploration of this sublevel reveals some interesting characteristics. For instance, it's unknown what time of the day it is, as there aren't any celestial bodies like the moon to keep track of, but it's predicted to be about dawn or dusk. The weather here also seems to be quite odd, as it's always clear. There are never any clouds, there's no rain or snow, which works out well for the sublevel since there aren't any storm drains or whatever to account for the rainfall. But at least the temperature is always a nice and pleasant 70 degrees Fahrenheit, Another thing is that the lights in the sublevel are all neon colored and have a color palette that I personally love to call bisexual lighting, but I've seen people call it a vaporwave palette, the TV girl palette, etc. So things like headlights, stoplights, and streetlights will also have this color palette rather than objects having their standard lighting colors. With this in mind, maybe don't drive here if you don't want to stop on pink and go on blue. The areas of this sublevel also vary in appearance, as the more suburban neighborhoods are adorned with wider streets and front yards. But if a wanderer were to come across the hotels and inns in the more city-like part of the sublevel, they'll find that there are even less accessible buildings here. Not only that, but the streets here are narrower, and there are cars here. However, the cars always seem to be locked too, so they're useless if a wanderer wanted a faster way to get around the sublevel. This isn't where the weirdness of the sublevel ends either, as the environment of the sublevel seems to stretch on infinitely. People haven't seen anything like mountains or hills or any other geographical differences aside from a flat and infinitely stretching plain. You'd also expect to hear city sounds and other suburban neighborhood-like noises, right? Birds chirping, car engines idling, I don't know, the wind, but no. The only sounds you can hear are the hum of the neon lights and your own footsteps. Do you know how unnerving that is? I think I'd feel like I'm SpongeBob sneaking around Patrick's house while he's trying to sleep. The other unnerving thing here is the actual composition of the level. See, there aren't any entities here, not even facelings. However, further studies of this level have shown that even things like the foliage found in the neighborhood sections are composed of a synthetic material that seems to resemble plastic, which I imagine to be something like AstroTurf. The lack of entities here would usually be reassuring, but considering this next thing I'm going to talk about, I have to wonder if it's because they were essentially compelled to not inhabit this sublevel for long. The main thing you'll realize as you wander through this sublevel is that you're alone. This isn't just because of the sheer size and scale of the sublevel, although that's like a huge part of it, but it's because of something wanderers who have studied level 9.1 called the Wanderlust effect. Wanderers who have studied level 9.1 have noticed a unique psychological phenomenon that they have dubbed as the Wanderlust effect. This is described as the eventual desire to leave level 9.1. And yeah, I understand wanting to leave a sublevel in search of a way back to reality, or a safer sublevel with more reliable resources, or even one that will lead to a level like level 399, the Neon Paradise. However, wanderers who have set up or joined colonies with the intention of staying have all been recorded to end up leaving after less than a week. This effect doesn't seem to be caused by any sort of anomalous material or miasma within the level, as nothing like that is present here. Rather, it's theorized to be caused by a subconscious feeling of discomfort due to the lack of life, even on a microbial scale. One wanderer who really wanted to stay in the sublevel even went as far as telling her colony mates to physically restrain her, as to better resist the wanderlust effect. However, after 5 days of being in the sublevel, she began to hurt herself in an attempt to escape her restraints and flee the sublevel. Because of this, it's thought that the longer a wanderer resists the effect and remains in the sublevel, the stronger the effect becomes. But when these wanderers were asked to describe the sensation, they all had trouble pinpointing the exact feeling or even the cause of them. Many wanderers have described the wanderlust effect as making them feel dissatisfaction, discomfort, melancholy, and nostalgia, but noted that while almond water didn't make the effects dissipate completely, it did help dull the sensation. Meg researchers believe this effect is the reason for the particular lack of life in the level. Like I mentioned earlier, there doesn't even seem to be any microbial life here. I feel I should note that despite the intensity of this effect, wanderers do feel safe enough to travel through level 9.1 and even stay in it for a day or two in search of a different level or sublevel, even if they know they will never be able to realistically set up any sort of permanent colony because of the wanderlust effect. To enter this enigmatic sublevel, you can enter a house near a pink or blue colored streetlight on level 9, which will bring you to this sublevel. You can also rarely end up here if you wander through level 18 long enough. To exit before the wanderlust effect gets too intense, you can find a subway tunnel entrance in the city areas and go down into it to be taken to level 154. Or you can find a ladder in the ceiling of one of the houses in the neighborhoods to be taken to the attic, which maybe don't go to the booby trap attic level for obvious reasons. This sublevel was fascinating because it takes two liminal space concepts that, while fundamentally the same, are unnerving enough in their own right to offer a unique read from combining them together. I also really like the idea of there being such a potent anomalous effect that not even microbial life wants to stick around. What did you guys think? Level 0.22, also known as fully remodeled, is classified as 1E and is safe, stable, and seems to have minimal non-entity hazards. It's described as an empty industrial building with your typical fluorescent lights, white ceiling, weird yellow-green walls, and patterned gray carpets. It's also mentioned to have small metal heaters, vents, and modernized office doors, though if you were to go there yourself, you'd find that the sublevel may look different to you than what I just described, and that's because the sublevel is said to have an appearance that varies from wanderer to wanderer. These can include differences like having brown walls instead of the yellow-green ones, or one wanderer mentioning that the sublevel vaguely resembled a modern-looking kitchen. Some wanderers even state that this applies to the actual size of the sublevel itself, with some describing it as being as small as a single room or exponentially large. Even stranger, these wanderers were able to provide photographic evidence to back up their accounts. There seems to be an implied explanation as to the appearance of level 0.22, but I'll get into that in a bit. The overall level seems to be a blend of level 0 and what can only be described as haphazard renovations. The walls are intended for easier access to wiring, the painting is inconsistent and seems to taper off into another color in some areas as if they were caused by broad and messy strokes, and the space just looks off. The level page describes it as being built to serve an obscure purpose, but what that purpose could be is unknown. My best guess is to be the literal representation of an office space you'd see in a dream. It's also surprising that the sublevel is considered safe due to the terrible and hazardous construction that's been done here. But additional questions that have been posed wonder whether the level generates independently for each wanderer, or if the sublevel is simply so massive that it's segmented into many different parts that don't interconnect. It also seems to be mostly empty, as there doesn't seem to be furniture that can be found here. However, wanderers have reported modern construction equipment like paint buckets, hammers, and forklifts of all things. Imagine being forklift certified in the Backrooms. But no, really, it seems like someone, or a group of people, know how to operate heavy equipment because everything I mentioned appears to be used in one way or another. You can even note things like rust and breakage on the heavy machinery, suggesting extensive wear and tear, as well as a significant amount of past time, supporting the idea that this sublevel was somehow created by wanderers. Oh, and if you're wondering, yeah, you can take all that construction equipment with you out of the level, because they're still in decent condition despite their worn out appearances. Now, aside from the sublevel being very much non-Euclidean in its geometry and appearance, as well as the anomalous phenomenon of construction equipment showing up, you'll also notice that whenever you're in level 0.22, you're the only one there. It's not surprising, but this sublevel has that typical isolation effect you'd expect from Backrooms levels. So setting up any kind of colonies, outposts, or settlements is impossible. At least you don't have to worry about any entities that are here. Well, there are rumors of Entity 17, cats, being seen, which are basically another cat-type entity you can find in the Backrooms. And no, I'm not talking about those cute little cat orbs that Fungrly talked about a long time ago, although I do like the idea of those things just following you around and keeping you safe. I should go watch that video again. But aside from all that, there's only really a couple of things that could harm you here. For instance, some of the ceiling lights could be loose, or the heaters could spontaneously explode, which, wow, that's scary when you think about it. But the most dangerous anomalous effect is the room suddenly becoming very hot or very cold. I'm talking about a range from 32 degrees Fahrenheit to 112, or 0 to 44.44 degrees Celsius. Hopefully, you got a level of 0.22 that has multiple rooms for you to escape to if needed. And as you'd expect, the craftsmanship, while rarely causing accidents like I mentioned earlier, does lead to some inconvenient issues with some parts of the sublevel, like doors that can't open, dark rooms with lights that don't work, and malfunctioning electrical sockets. To enter this roulette of a sublevel, you can rarely find a door on level 0 labeled second attempt. Going through that door will lead you to level 0.22. You can also enter a building that is under construction on level 11 or level 111 to be brought to the sublevel. A more mysterious entrance describes various unknown factors that will lead a wanderer back to this sublevel from level 0.23. Exiting this sublevel is fairly simple, as going through an exit door will take you to either level 0 or level 27. You can also end up in level 0.23 through a description of, quote, various unknown factors. There's also a whole section that seems to be a transcript of a conversation between two users where they discussed an old notebook they found that was written by someone named Shapur Kajitan. And in it, it supposedly describes how Shapur was the one who created the sublevel. After one of the users transcribes the entries, they send it to their friend, and it reads as follows. I always thought that level 0 was not the best place to be in. You can't see anyone, there are no entities, and the ways to exit the level are very obscure. Hell, a group even tried to remodel the level for that same reason, but due to their unfamiliarity with an undocumented phenomenon in the main 9, the attempt was unsuccessful. However, knowing that there are now ways to work around the complication, making a successful revamp isn't the worst idea out there, right? Besides, many have done similar projects without help from others, so it shouldn't be impossible. With that in mind, I began to gather supplies and begin the remodeling project. I decided that this would be a landmark of some sorts, a place where wanderers can meet up and relax. At first, I didn't really have the supplies to begin the project, besides a couple of supplies I stole off an Architect Industries employee, so I went to level 20 to gather materials. I forgot how much I took from there, but I believed it was more than enough. It was a lot less efficient without a team working with me, but I was able to manage. I don't even remember how big that place was, but that doesn't matter. All I needed to figure out is to somehow stop the isolation effect at level 0 without the necessary equipment. As a result, I decided to rest and go on the trip back to that warehouse for a while to get the materials needed to create a makeshift version of the equipment. But when I eventually did get back, everything that I made was just gone. And in its spot, only an ordinary section of level 0 with a door labeled Renovations in Progress. As I opened the doorway, I saw it. There it was, my unfinished creation, now completely taken form. It wasn't long before I came to realize that I ran out of the stolen Architect Industries tech in my possession. Thus, I had to pause for the renovations. Despite my work remaining unfinished, it was, for the most part, a drastic improvement than what they had made. The way the author describes how they constructed the sublevel and the events surrounding it really does seem like it gives credence to the idea that the sublevel behaves the way that it does because of the person that created it. Which brings an interesting question to mind. If people have trouble creating a sublevel, could that be the reason why there are some sublevels that vary in appearance from wanderer to wanderer? But I really liked this sublevel. It has an interesting explanation as to how and why it exists. What did you guys think? Level 14.1, also known as Child's Play, is classified as Class 1 and is safe, stable, and features a minimal entity count. This sublevel is described as an infinitely expanding children's hospital consisting mainly of hospital hallways made of concrete walls painted gray with green or purple accenting stripes. The floor seems to be made of a similar material, though it's described as a stormy gray. One thing you'll note about the sublevel is that the familiar hum buzz of the ceiling lights is not here, and there's even a small chance you'll find one of these lights off, though it's not really known why this is. I would describe this level as a drastically different version of the old level Run for Your Life. You know, the one level that had a 12-mile hospital hallway and you start halfway and have to outrun the entities chasing you for the next 6 miles. Well, this sublevel, while also being a hospital-themed sublevel, is significantly calmer, quieter, and neater. Occasionally, you can find chairs and tables scattered around, and you can also find windows at the end of the halls. These windows are said to be safe, thankfully, and only show a blinding white void. I mean, the last thing you need in a place like this is something as inconspicuous as a window entity. One other thing this sublevel and level Run for Your Life share is the amount of closed and locked doors that are present. Seeing as wanderers are not being chased by a horde of entities, they have time to actually check these doors and see if they lead anywhere. However, wanderers will quickly notice that a majority of the doors on the sublevel are locked and unable to be opened. Even methods like lockpicking don't seem to work, and wanderers can easily pick out these locked doors by seeing if the door is blocked off by a chair or a table. However, this hasn't stopped the curiosity of wanderers, as they've tried to find methods of entering these sealed rooms, but it seems like there aren't any ways to enter them through either side, not even through the walls of the hallways themselves. On the rare chance that a wanderer is able to open one of these doors, they'll be met with a standard-looking hospital room featuring the same wall, floor, and ceiling appearance of the main hallways, but most of the times the lights will be off. In these rooms, wanderers can expect to find 3 medium-sized hospital beds, a green armchair, and what's described as an unsystematic number of chairs and tables. However, it's not a clutter-filled mess like you'd expect. They're actually set up in such a way that nothing is making contact with each other, which, I don't know, to me seems like a pretty big hospital room, all things considered. There also seems to be a window entity in these rooms that gives them their light source, though it's highly advised to stay away from these windows specifically. The layout of the sublevel is, as you can imagine, pretty non-Euclidean. It's described as a puzzling and incredibly unpredictable labyrinthian structure, with hallways being in any arrangement that you can imagine. Oftentimes, these hallways lead to dead ends, and other times they stretch out for an undetermined variety of distances. The corridors themselves can also be positioned in any angle, kind of like the hallway leading to the Red Neighborhood in the Pitfalls episode of Kane and Pixel's The Backrooms series. Needless to say, this sublevel seems to behave in the same anomalous and enigmatic ways that Level 0 does. But one major difference between Level 0 and Level 014.1 is that once a wanderer passes through a hallway here, it will forever stay that way for that specific wanderer. So, for someone who has consistently navigated through the sublevel, it becomes an effortless endeavor. Another area wanderers can often find are playrooms. These are spacious rooms with an overwhelming amount of toys and games, and features a colorful, comfy carpet-like material on the floor, while the walls are identical to the ones found in the hallways. This area seems to be a source of nostalgia and comfort for many wanderers, as many of them report feeling the sensation once they enter the playroom. Oftentimes, they'll even reminisce about their childhood, which, while endearing, is actually a sign that you should immediately leave the playroom, as staying here for too long can drive a wanderer to insanity and cause them to regress back into a childlike mentality. Unfortunately, once a wanderer has reached this stage, it's said to be practically impossible to bring them back to their usual self. So, yeah, maybe don't go into these rooms. In terms of its potential for habitation, level 14.1 is pretty solid. However, it seems to be advised to not stay on the sublevel for a long period of time. This is mainly due to the inconsistent amount of helpful resources. For instance, in terms of food and water, wanderers can rarely find a whole banana, or even rarer, bottles of almond water in the trash cans found throughout the sublevel. but you're more likely to find empty milk cartons or hand sanitizer bottles. However, it seems like even these objects can't be trusted, as there have been cases of these objects being harmful or even poisonous to wanderers. As for entities, the only thing you'll find here are the windows, which seem to reside in most rooms and hallways, though the ones in the hallways seem to be the only safe and approachable ones, which would make this sublevel very ideal to stay in for a long time were it not for the potential of poisonous hand sanitizer gel. Nonetheless, there still seems to be a few colonies set up here. The first colony is called the Nothing Colony and consists of 41 people. They're friendly and open to trading and seem to be looking for new members. We also have the Meg-based golfers, which seems to have about 60 members. While they're open to trading, they don't seem to be willing to accept anyone else in. Finally, we have the Box Cult, and they are the smallest group out of the three. They only have about 20 to 30 members, and if you're wondering why their population number isn't certain, it's because their members have been reported to perform various rituals on other members, which can sometimes result in their death. They're also extremely hostile, not even hesitating to attack a wanderer if they see one. They also very rarely let anyone join the group, which is very funny considering cults love to expand their members. To enter this liminal and weird hospital, you can find a teddy bear in level 14 to be sent here, or you can find and no clip through a white wall in level 508 to end up here. To exit, you can find a hallway with a pipe attached to the ceiling and follow it to eventually end up in level 15. Sometimes you can find a door labeled office and go through it to be taken to level 4. You can also find a door with a kanji symbol on it, which will take you to level 51. A rarer and weirder method of exiting the level involves waiting to see if the ceiling begins to leak water. If this happens, wanderers can head into the direction of the water leak and follow it long enough for all the doors to turn blue and lead into level 102. Finally, a wanderer can find anesthesia and take it to be transported to level 16. This sublevel was really neat. I've been to my fair share of hospitals over the years, and while I was never scared of wandering around their hallways or being there at odd hours of the day, it was always unnerving to imagine a dead silent hospital instead of an actively noisy one, especially one that is meant for children. I also like the weird psychological effect that can happen if you decide to stay in these playrooms, though I wonder what ends up happening to you after you finally lose your sanity. Does the sublevel dispose of you, or do you just waste away? And those were 4 cool and super liminal sublevels that I really enjoyed reading about, and I hope you enjoyed them too. I do miss doing these spooky sublevel videos, so if this is something you guys want to see more of, please let me know. I'd also like to eventually put all of these sublevels I go over in order and make a big supercut, so let me know if that's also something you'd like to see from me. If you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe, as well as turn on notifications so you don't miss the next time I upload or stream. I hope y'all take care, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!